It's no secret that this upcoming draft will feature one of the greatest prospects of this generation, a man that is being touted as the greatest prospect since LeBron James, a player who can shoot, defend, pass, handle the ball like a guard while standing 7'3" in length with an 8-foot wingspan, and can get up and down the court in a hurry. An all-around skill set that we quite frankly have never seen in basketball history, and that man is Victor Wembanyama, a 19-year-old French basketball player who has been putting grown professional men to shame overseas with his level of dominance. And it's also no secret that some of the worst teams in the NBA have been chomping at the bit as losing as many games as possible to have the best odds at landing Wembanyama. Tank for Wemby, the common trending hashtag on NBA Twitter throughout the season. And while some teams like the Pistons, Rockets, and Spurs have the highest odds at a shot to land Wembanyama, history has shown us that these tanking teams aren't always rewarded with the number one pick. In fact, the last time a team with the worst record in the NBA landed the number one pick, it was the 2018 Phoenix Suns who used that pick to select DeAndre Ayton. And that was back when the odds favored the worst teams in the NBA more so than they do now. And the last time there was a generational talent entering the draft that led to a host of tanking teams was in 2019. When Zion Williamson was viewed as the next superstar of the NBA. But sure enough, the New Orleans Pelicans, who had a pre-lottery position to land the number 7 pick, jumped up 6 spots to get the number 1 spot, and with just a 6% chance of landing said pick. And while there are conspiracies around whether the NBA draft lottery is rigged to ensure the next future face of the league lands on a team that will generate the most viewership, the question is, where will Victor Wembanyama land in the NBA? And what team would he actually fit best on, both for himself as well as the benefit of the league overall? Well, that's what we'll be exploring in this video. If you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, consider subscribing so you don't miss a video, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, I'm sure most of you are aware of the website tankathon.com, a site that lists out the current odds of the NBA draft lottery based on teams' records, and it enables you to simulate the draft lottery to see where teams fall between picks 1 through 14. It's quite silly really, because we all know at the end of the day every simulation means nothing in terms of what will actually happen when the ping pong balls are drawn on May 16th, but we all do it. And I also took it to another level and simulated the machine 100 times to see which teams landed with the number 1 pick the most. And surprisingly, despite the top 3 teams, or at least I should say the worst 3 teams being in the Pistons, the Rockets, and the Spurs, despite having the same odds and the highest odds of hitting the number 1 pick, they were not the team that landed the number 1 pick the most often out of the 100 times that the thing was simulated. No, in fact, the team that received the number 1 pick the most often was the Portland Trail Blazers, hitting number 1 22 times out of 100 despite only having a 10.5% chance of getting the number 1 pick. The team after that, the Houston Rockets, with a 14% chance of getting that pick, receiving it 17 times out of 100. Followed by the Charlotte Hornets, another team not in the bottom 3 with the best odds, hitting number 1 15 times out of 100. And then finally the Detroit Pistons, who finished with the worst record in the NBA last season, receiving it 14 times out of 100. Between those 4 teams, that was 68% of all of the simulations. The Spurs were next, by the way, who hit number 1 13 times. After that, you had the more obscure, lucky one-off teams who jumped substantially, like the Dallas Mavericks getting it a few times, the Indiana Pacers, the Orlando Magic, yes, even the Chicago Bulls hit the number 1 pick 2 times out of 100. We can all dream, right? But regardless of the hypothetical simulations, whether you do it once, twice, 10 times, 100 times, or even 1,000, you're going to get varying results, which speaks to how anything can happen in the NBA draft lottery. And even when things seem down in the dumps, a team's future and the trajectory of their franchise can change drastically overnight by seeing their name called for that number 1 pick, even when the odds are stacked against them. Now, of course, Victor Wembanyama, with his skill set and arsenal of weapons in his basketball repertoire, would fit on any team. There is no denying that. There isn't a single team in the NBA who would not benefit from having a player like Wemby on their roster. He is that good and is only 19 with the ability to get even better. And for a team like the Portland Trail Blazers, who have struggled the last few seasons to gain any kind of ground or progress in building around Damian Lillard, landing Wembanyama, when arguably their biggest need is a competent modern-day big man, no disrespect to Yusuf Nurkic, but he simply is not that, would be huge for that franchise, who knows they need to start putting together win-now pieces before Lillard starts asking for a trade. And while I'm sure some will say, well, Wembanyama coming in as a 19-year-old rookie isn't going to be ready now to actually help in terms of getting Lillard to that next step of his career, Wemby, by all indications, will be NBA ready. That will provide an immediate impact even if drafted to a team that is looking to compete now rather than for the future. And for the Blazers, you combine Wembanyama with a young up-and-coming Anthony Simons, who has just started breaking out, Shaedon Sharpe, who has looked like a star in the making towards the end of the year with his level of confidence that he was playing with. And if you're able to re-sign Jeremy Grant on a team-friendly deal, if it means also adding Wembanyama to the roster, which maybe you could get done, not saying this would make the Blazers title contenders, but seeing Wembanyama in a Blazers uniform paired next to another superstar in Damian Lillard and some key role players who were up and coming is much more exciting both for Wembanyama and for the NBA, rather than seeing Victor, say, in a Hornets uniform, who was the third team with the most number 1 selections. Look, I'm not saying Wemby can't make the Hornets a fun and exciting team, especially if LaMelo Ball is healthy next season. Seeing a pick and roll and pick and pop duo between Ball and Wembanyama would be a lot of fun to watch. But at the end of the day, aside from Hornets fans, I don't think anyone wants to see him in Charlotte, a small market franchise that is very poorly run. No offense to Michael Jordan, greatest player of all time, my childhood hero, probably my favorite player of all time, but he's terrible at owning and running a franchise. And Wembanyama getting selected by the Hornets just means we'll never truly get to see Wemby achieve his full potential or having the right cast built around him. It's just not going to happen when you're on the Hornets. You're talking about a franchise that hasn't won a playoff series in 2 decades and has only been to the playoffs, losing in the first round in every single one of them 3 times since 2002. Now, the last place you want to see Wembanyama is ending up in Charlotte of all places. The Houston Rockets, though, a team that had the second most number 1 selections in the Tankathon simulator, that could be interesting. A team that has been in a full-blown rebuild since moving on from James Harden, hasn't made the playoffs the last 3 seasons, picked up 2 high lottery picks in Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr., who, while good, haven't been as good as maybe their draft selection, especially when we consider some of the guys that went after them, but still very young, super athletic, and talented players, gifted scorers. And then Tari Eason, a mid-first rounder that has been very nice for them. They're one of the youngest teams in the NBA, and now you add a future once-in-a-generation talent in Wembanyama, a team that is in desperate need of a big man, would probably go down as the next best big in that franchise since Hakeem Olajuwon. Wemby on the Rockets would be nice, but honestly, where I want to see Victor Wembanyama the most, more than any other lottery team, aside from the Chicago Bulls, of course, but with just a 1.8% chance, we know that that's not going to happen for the Bulls, but that's in the San Antonio Spurs. Now, a lot depends on whether Pop is still going to be coaching, how long he's going to be coaching, and I know some will say Wemby on the Spurs has to be the most boring team in the league that you could want him to be on. But here's the thing, the Spurs are one of the few organizations that has the right culture, the right personnel, and leadership to develop and get the most out of their talent. And while I'm sure Wembanyama is going to do well no matter what team he goes to, for me personally, just based on what we have seen from this kid in playing overseas, I want to see the next big legend in the NBA. With LeBron retiring soon, Kobe Bryant, God rest his soul, retiring a few years back, Steph Curry likely only having another good 2 to 3 years left before he hangs it up, I need to see the next all-time great. I want to be able to witness the next top 10 greatest player of all time. And while yes, I still think we could get that from Wembanyama on a team like the Blazers or Pistons, even the Rockets, I see it being much more likely in terms of developing his talents to the fullest with an organization like the Spurs, even after Popovich retires. Simply because of the great culture they've been able to establish, an incredible front office that has a great knack for finding the talent and maximizing player strengths, although maybe the Josh Primo stuff aside, even though we still don't know the full story behind that situation. And then of course, aside from the obvious fit of the current roster being on the Spurs, that they don't have a ton of size, depth in the front court, especially after they traded Jakob Poeltl at the deadline. They're not a good defensive rebounding team, not a good shot blocking team, even worse since moving Poeltl. Adding Wembanyama, who is an elite rim protector, a great scorer in the paint, but can also spread the floor with his outside shooting, would fit perfectly into their system to help on both ends of the floor. And with Wembanyama, a very smart and competent front office that can build around a guy like him, I can see another future dynasty in the making for the Spurs that we saw recently win 5 championships in the Tim Duncan era. That's where I want to see Victor Wembanyama next season. It's where I think he would fit best, where he would develop, grow, and mature as a player the best, and where it would also be the best for the league overall. That and the Chicago Bulls, of course, because the Bulls are a global brand and a big market, but I also know that I'm biased. One other team I think actually would be interesting if they got the number 1 pick would be the Utah Jazz, because they have so much going for them in terms of their overall future with the amount of draft capital and young players. Not too crazy about the idea of Wemby being in Utah, but more so just the fact that their future has a lot of potential with all these assets they're going to have at their disposal to help build around Wembanyama if they were to land him. What I want to know is where you guys would like to see Victor Wembanyama play in the NBA. Let me know in the comments, and as always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.